Welcome, I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Pack. This is Global Insight. The Wuhan coronavirus, now being known as COVID-19, has killed more than 1,100 people worldwide, all but 2 of them in mainland China. Some estimates put the number of infected people who have caught this pneumonia-like disease at more than 300,000 worldwide. Welcome, Robert.
Good morning, Bruce.
This virus has very obvious and serious health concerns.
Yeah.
It also has a political dimension. How is the politics of coronavirus playing out in China?
At the moment, this is a very big challenge for the Chinese leadership. It comes at a time when the legitimacy of the Chinese leadership has been facing some challenges in Hong Kong with the democracy protests, and also ramped up international attention with the treatment of the Uyghurs, Muslim minority, within China by the authorities there. And there's signs that the Chinese leadership are very sensitive about this. So this challenge that's now presented itself, which developed towards the end of last year, I think is potentially a tricky political problem. It was striking that Xi Jinping initially declared he was taking personal charge of the coronavirus crisis, but then he delegated that to the vice premier, which suggests that he anticipates that this could be a very difficult challenge and he doesn't want to become too personally identified with it, just in case it turns out to be a potential disaster. Again, this is a little bit of speculation, but there do seem to be reasonably reliable reports coming out of China of considerable anger about the slowness in the authorities getting to grips with this problem. And something like 2 to 3 weeks is the period in which critics have said, within China and outside it, the Chinese authorities were a bit slow off the mark. So I think it's a formidable challenge in its own right, but it's come at a difficult time for the Chinese leadership, who are facing a number of problems. And it does have other implications too.
It was not something they could have anticipated. That's hard to manage, really, isn't it? How do you think it could play out for them?
Well, analysts sometimes describe unanticipated events as black swan events, and they can make or unmake governments. So there's numerous examples of this. For example, the Pearl Harbor attack was an event which apparently came out of the blue for the United States and led to the United States entering the Second World War. We then saw a nuclear reactor accident in the former Soviet Union in 1986, which certainly increased the divisions within the Soviet leadership and radicalized Mr. Gorbachev into taking a position that the Soviet Union must reduce the cost of Cold War competition with the United States. And now we have this coronavirus event, which does have the potential to further test the legitimacy of the communist leadership led by Xi Jinping. I think it's been clear for some time that there are differences of opinion within the Chinese leadership. And although it's not expressed in the same way it is in the West, we have to look for coded messages and, who's taking a position in a certain order at a public ceremony. Sometimes this will give us clues to what's going on in terms of the pecking order. But it's no secret that there has been tensions within the Chinese leadership over such issues as China's building of artificial islands in the South China Sea. And so Xi Jinping will have his critics who may use this crisis as an opportunity to stake their claim against him. Not necessarily to overthrow him from power, but to weaken. This is a leader who appeared to be very strong until very recently. He changed the constitution to put himself in power for life. So there will be some ambitious, frustrated people within the Chinese political leadership who may feel this is an opportunity to weaken Xi Jinping's grip on power. This is speculation, of course, but we do know that an event like this, which the regime clearly hasn't prepared for, and it's already outstripping the comparable event that we saw the the severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, of 2002, 2003. I think that killed about 800 people. This has already killed, as you indicated in the introduction, quite a large number more, I think more than 300 more. And it's likely to, all the indications from the World Health Organization and other authorities is that the death rate is likely to increase. So it is, I think, a black swan event. Now, it could be that Xi Jinping's leadership rallies and it boosts the regime. But I think it also has the potential to cause political problems for the Chinese government.
It's really interesting what you're saying, that unexpected events can actually change the course of history.
Yeah.
What do you think Xi Jinping needs to do in this unexpected event to stop it unravelling badly for him?
Well, he's got several things on his side. He runs an authoritarian regime, and in theory, an authoritarian regime can take the drastic measures to limit infection, which may be more problematic in a free democratic system. And there are already signs that there's quite considerable efforts. China's just been through a 2-week holiday, the lunar year, and there are already signs that a lot of people are not returning to work as normal, not just in the affected area, but cities outside. So, in theory, Xi Jinping can apply all the tools of the authoritarian regime to limit the prospects of infection by keeping people in isolation and limiting the prospects for cross-infection. Interesting, in the last 2 days, Chinese authorities have indicated that the rate of infection is dropping. The other thing I think that could help Xi Jinping is a constructive relationship in cooperating with other countries which will almost be certainly affected by this. China is a formidable economic player, so this has major reverberations globally. And so I think Xi Jinping, we can't write him off yet. What we're really saying is this has a potential to be a difficult problem for him. And it will test the limits of his capabilities, because one of the criticisms that I've heard from Chinese critics of his leadership, and I'm talking about critics within the system, is that he has surrounded himself with cronies because he wants to consolidate absolute power, which means that some very talented people who may be more independently minded but nevertheless make a critical contribution to an anticipated problem. When you're confronted with an unanticipated problem or a black swan event, it's very much in the self-interest of political decision makers to have the best and brightest around them, to give them the necessary advice they need in such a situation. If he has surrounded himself with cronies, people who always say, yes sir, 3 bags full sir, then he could suffer politically as a result of not getting that sort of advice. Now, I'm sure he's doing his best in the circumstances to correct that tendency if it's present. And it's amazing when people are under pressure, they can often change their political habits and bring in people who are out of favour to help them deal with the problem. And that may be what's happening.
We're talking about what Xi Jinping might need to do, but of course what's good for a leader and good for a government is not necessarily what's good for the general population. Does coronavirus have the potential to increase personal freedoms for the people of China, or do you think this is always only going to end badly for them?
It could do both. In the short term, the government could cite the coronavirus as a reason to curtail personal freedoms. But remember, China is an engine of the global economy. It's the second biggest economy in the world. And its fate is linked to the external world economy. The legitimacy of the Communist Party depends on being a great economic power. So there are limits to how far the regime, for political reasons or reasons of this health emergency, can limit the freedoms of their citizens, because there has to be a certain degree of leeway in order for the economy to function well. In the long term, if this crisis does not go away quickly, and if the regime cannot, if you like, put its stamp on it and get it under control, then you can see possible developments whereby the legitimacy of the Communist Party is more openly challenged. I think we need to be very clear about this. There seems to be an unofficial social contract in China between the Communist Party and the population. And it goes as follows. The Communist Party really says to the people, you let us rule, and in return we will deliver consistent economic growth. And so far that arrangement's worked quite well. But the economic consequences of this crisis are substantial. We haven't really dealt with them, but they're potentially explosive because already some economic analysts are seeing a significant downturn in economic growth in China, and indeed for the global economy. That will be felt within China, but it will also be felt outside of it. You see, when we had the crisis in 2002, 2003, the SARS crisis, China had a much smaller economy. About 4% of world economic output came from China then. Fast forward to 2020, China is now responsible for 16% of global economic output and is the second biggest economy after the United States. Many car components, many computer components are made in China. Already there are signs of shortages developing in a number of countries, developed countries, which depend on China as part of these extended global supply chains. Why are there shortages developing? Going back to some of the reasons we've discussed, because some of the workers have not returned to work after their holiday for health reasons. They're observing isolation. So this has the potential to be quite a big hit for a global economy, which hasn't really recovered globally since the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. The US economy has recovered quite strongly. But otherwise, there are signs of fragility in the global economy. And so this has, a significant economic consequences both within and outside China.
Interesting to hear what you see as the global implications. How about for New Zealand?
Well, New Zealand is like many countries. It will be affected by the downturn in aviation traffic that's now occurring. And also, China is responsible for a lot of the world's tourists. Something like close to 150 million Chinese travel. And of course, tourism is a very big industry in this country. And we will be affected by the downturn, which looks like it's almost certainly going to be a significant downturn. A number of operators in this country, travel agents and other businesses, are geared to visits from Chinese visitors. So that's going to have significant effects in this country. We're also part of a number of global supply chains, and they're going to be deeply disrupted by what's happening in China, and we will also be affected by that process.
Oh, thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Gesundheit.